I did not only act as the CFO, but as the lead restructuring executive. The head of media and PR, the head of the investment group, the head of air compliance, the head of risk, and the executive leader who was responsible for implementing the financial strategy of the group. I left Arab Tech in March 2013 and joined Faqih IVF as the group CEO, a small UAE-based medical group specializes in the treatment of infertility in males and females, and in 2 years turned it into the market leader in the sector, accounting for at least 30% of the market, and revenues increasing by about 400%. So I was asked today to address the following questions. Are CFOs ready to drive the business? My answer is that they have no choice, and if they do not, then we want to make sure that they are ready to do so, and if they're not capable, then we should replace them. No offense. Today, when the biggest business challenge is responding to a world in which the frame and basis of competition are always changing. Any efforts to set corporate strategy must consider more than traditional and historic performance measures. Attention must be paid to more stakeholders, more regulation, and definitely more risks. In my view, there are a few drivers that offer the richest opportunities and challenges if they're not handled well. And these will be really the reasons for success or failure. First, we have what we call Global Inc. The global economy is one big company. We have global rebalancing. This is the first decade where in the first 200 years, emerging markets, including GCC, contribute more growth than the developed ones. And we see China is now the biggest economy, more or less, in the world. Productivity. Developed world economies will need to generate pronounced gains in productivity to power continued economic growth. A pricing strategy, there has to be an increased focus on resource productivity and the emergence of clean tech industries. And we can see, for example, sectors like recycling that are emerging, etc. And which raises an issue for the governments. How can they keep a balance between economic growth and sustain a reasonable level of social stability? Our region, as you know now, we're part of Global Inc. We are better off than other regions in the world with some possibly security issues. But despite a favorable economic outlook, the IMF warned of weakening fiscal balances across the GCC countries. Although we're rich economies, most of them, not all of them, we still have fiscal imbalances. Saudi Arabia is showing a deficit for the first time in a number of years, in 2015, most likely 2016. Other countries are okay. Qatar, Kuwait are fine because they're not spending as much. UAE, Saudi Arabia have buffers, but again, their energy policies have to change, and unless they change and they reduce the subsidies, probably they will face the same issues as other countries. So if you look at the world economy and what's happening in the region and so on, what will be the new role of the CFO under these conditions? There was a major study by one of the big consulting groups who benchmarked over 1,200 companies around the world. And they discovered that many companies are struggling despite major investment in systems and processes and performance improvement, if it's training or processes or computer systems and so on, strategic consultants. And the research revealed that companies face three primary barriers to improving performance. One, there is insufficient alignment between strategic and operational decision-making and the operating business level itself. You know, you have a CEO and a board deciding what they want to do. Then you have divisions who have different incentives, and they interpret a budget differently. There is lack of up-to-date information for possibly up-to-date information for strategic and operational levels. I remember I was having this discussion with a friend of mine who has a big, one of the small airlines here in the UAE. And what hit them is they never assumed at all that the price of oil would go down and drop below $90 or $85 only 6 months ago. You know, so we always budget for the worst thing. What do we do? Budget for the better things. And there is inadequate processing and conflicting data standards at different levels of the organization. So you have 60,000 employees working in 6 different countries. Your incentive bonus or to drive your employees are differently because the sales people have a different issue as compared to production people or people who keep the stock one way or another. And the cumulative impact of all these definitely are troublesome and typically result in businesses' performance that, in my view, mediocre. So in most of the companies studied, there is a notable lack of, as was mentioned earlier, quantitative management competences, and that are, in my view, necessary to overcome these barriers. And within the new global operating requirement, without such support from improving strategy and operations, companies face often a losing battle in transforming their businesses. Companies with the strongest quantitative performance will definitely do better than others. So, and again, at the heart of this is what I call the financial transformation. I think the financial team has to be involved in all aspects because they're the one that can put a number against every part of the process. I have an advantage because I come from an engineering background. I can map a process. I have the understanding of numbers and finance, so I can put a number against it. I can map it. I was a strategic consultant, so I can see a plan, I can take it through. And I think this knowledge and approach has to be across. And I think the people, if we can push the financial team to take this forward, I think they will be the savior of any business in the future. They cannot be just the bystanders and keepers and gatekeepers of information and historic data. So by financial transformation can provide a platform, in my view, of this effective enterprise transformation. And they can play 4 roles, in my view. First of all, as the steward, which is required, because they ensure the company-wide compliance with regarding reporting and control requirements, managing risk, providing high-quality business and operation information, accounts, and so on. And as an operator, defining and adopting the operating model to balance efficiency and service levels across the business. And as a strategist, which is something they're not doing yet, by supporting the business strategy development through robust decision-making processes and doing scenario analysis and putting numbers against these views that marketing people come up with, or the CEO, and so on. And as a catalyst, this is the important thing, by partnering with the business executives to change organizational behavior and drive disciplined execution of strategic choices across the enterprise, including marketing, sales, service supply, chain management, and innovation in general. So the 2 parts, the steward and the operator, in principle they are required. So in Pakistan you have to file accounts. In Dubai we don't have to. So I think the first step is in the steward and operator side, we need to start implementing those requirements. So there has to be a regulation that every company has to have audited accounts one way or another. And I don't understand how banks in general will actually lend you money if there isn't such a requirement. So the vast majorities will still struggle in having finance capabilities, developing, executing strategy, and getting involved in the other sides. Now, so the involvement of finance in this transformation has to spread, in my view, all across the organization. So it has to be, as we said, in marketing, in sales, in services, in supply chain, in research, in R&D, in technology. And I'll give you some examples on that. If you take the big giant, BASF, the chemicals group, finance helped create a foundation of matrices around the notion of customer lifetime value. And they developed a sales and service approach focused on serving better the most valuable customers, with a deep understanding of the costs and benefits of winning and serving customers. As you know, they make products, they make chemicals, so they invest heavily in stock, and they need to generate cash flow, because the more cash they do, because it's marginal business, so they have to do so. They came up with these matrices, and they focused on customers that will make a decision very quickly, and they serve them better to make a decision better, so they improve the cash cycle. If you take, for example, companies like Rolls-Royce, and now GE and Pratt & Whitney are doing the same, finance plays a critical role in developing and implementing their service strategies, because more than 50% of the revenue of Rolls-Royce's revenue comes from services. Like many of its competitors, as you know, the jet engine and power generation equipment maker is focusing on selling power by the hour. So you can understand the complication of building a financial and mathematical model, so it can incorporate maintenance, development, innovation, R&D, the changes in material, the changes in labor, anything they can think of, and coming up with a mathematical model that do it. But this is why Rolls-Royce is doing extremely well, and they're hedged against all changes, and the airline businesses are happy with their service. If you take the example of Apple, when they designed now they don't sell as much because they've incorporated in their other system, when they came up with the iPod Nano MP3, if you remember, they were very small recording devices. What they did, they technically cornered the market and bought all the memory devices out of the Far East, and they spent $1 billion in buying all the capacity to ensure that they can first deliver on time for Christmas and so on, and they bought all the capacity that all the competitors cannot introduce similar products. And all this because finance was involved in doing numbers and helped them quantify all these things. So these are just some of the examples that where finance played a very important role in every aspect of strategy and operations. So going back to Global Inc. So what are the challenges? First of all, as you know, capital and management time are always limited now because things are much faster. And a new appreciation of risk accompanies each opportunity. So the CFO's judgment and that of the financial transformation team that we are talking about becomes very critical to push the management thinking and always have a quantitative way of assessing the sales team, the marketing team, the R&D, the ideas that are coming up with. And these are some of the questions that probably in your field, in your ideas, or in your sector you can think of. One of the questions, so what will be the main changes in business conditions be? For example, what weight are we giving to the possibility of wage and price inflation? If you look at Dubai, for example, a few years ago when the whole market and the world collapsed, real estate prices went down. Now there's a hype for whatever reason. We know why, because they're revaluing their assets so they can restructure their loans. Certain entities, we know that. All of a sudden, they push the prices up. We hear that, we are not allowing any rent increase above 20%. Everybody pushed the prices up. So all of a sudden, lots of good quality people cannot afford to live in Dubai. Inflation goes up. We warned about inflation. All of a sudden now, inflation is almost 4%. Interest rates still down, so what do? There's an imbalance. We expect interest rates to go up again. Cost of borrowing cannot too. And now we're seeing again, prices in real estate are going down. Not a lot of people can afford it. The next question, have you restructured enough to cope and succeed? A weak economy, as you know, gives you the chance to do what the hell you want, get away with it. So you can negotiate better, you can restructure better, you can do your deals better with your suppliers, with your staff, and so on. Again, is your supply chain sufficiently flexible or rigid? All of a sudden, if you ramp up your production, is your supplier going to say, I can't deliver this because you're going to be late and you suffer? Do you have a short list of acquisition targets? Is it better to buy your supplier one way or another or your services provider? And if so, now is the best time to do it when the market is down, possibly. Should you restart conversation with potential alliances? Because when things are better, probably the deal, the terms could be worse for you one way or another. Or maybe it's better to get out of that investment. And have you looked at your KPIs? Because things are changing now. It's not what they are before. And you can't just put a budget and a year later and say, what the hell went on? Do you have the financial resources if things get better? And I think people always consider financial resources when things get worse, and I think you should consider when things get better because it creates great opportunities for you. Have you got the funding? Are you going to possibly have some form of a bond or facilities one way or another? Because when you need it, the price is going to go up and the banks are going to definitely put you in a corner and not give you the best deal. Are there any investments that looked attractive at some stage? Maybe you can sell them and get into a better investment one way or another. Or is there an asset that you can get out of? Or is there a building that you can sell and release the cash that you can invest in expanding your logistical support one way or another? And have you really taken advantage of now buying good talent? Because when things are down, a lot of companies cut down on investment in marketing, in systems, in infrastructure, and in people. And I think the best time when the market is down is to invest in these good quality assets, in my view. And I'm sure there are lots of questions that apply to your sector in your business. But I want to follow up the question of, is our CFOs ready to drive the business with a related question of, can CFOs really make good CEOs? I'm not the right example because I'm probably the exception, because I was told no CFOs can ever make it in the healthcare sector. So that's another exception that I'm in. And a recent study found that among the current CEOs, Fortune 500, 60 or 12% started at the company as a finance chief, either at the corporate level or at one of its business units. And this number is expected to grow. These are very interesting statistics. Only about a third of the CEOs made the jump directly from CFO, with most occupying chief operating officer or divisional head in between. On average, these executives spent 8 years working their way up to CFO and spent about 4.5 years in the CFO slot. They averaged a total of 16 years at their company before taking on the leadership of a CEO. It is more common to become a CEO after rising to a CFO spot at the same company. Interesting. Only about 30% of the CEOs who had been CFOs were hired externally for the CFO position. Also interesting. The majority of companies with CEOs who were formerly a CEO, the majority of companies with CEOs who were formerly CFOs definitely outperformed everybody else. Great news, but that is only a minority, and we need more of those. So the good news is that the ones who make it will make it great, but only few of you. But not all of the CEOs will become CEOs, especially those who are unwilling or unable to step outside the traditional role of a financial gatekeeper. To move to the top, senior financial executives must have exceptional commercial skills, and they should be able to communicate effectively and be able to look at the situation and add value in every aspect of the business, not just only one side of it. So the question that we'll ask, and I hope you don't get offended because I'm not an accountant, should number crunchers aim high or remain content with remaining head of the finance department and being an effective number 2 to the CEO, which is a great job. I held that position, and I think it's a great job. Do the skills that make for a successful CFO really translate to making a great CEO? And are really CFOs up to the role? You should ask that question to yourself. And there are some specific circumstances, in my view, where CFOs will make great CEOs. Suppose that you have a holding investment company and all it matters are numbers. Suppose there is an issue where the company is going through major restructuring and need to look at the balance sheet. If there's a transition where you're doing a merger, your financial knowledge and expertise will be helpful. But in general, in the West or in developing countries, the view is that CFOs are often, no disrespect, without leadership skills, are weak at motivating and inspiring teams, and have a propensity to retain rather than delegate control. They want to know everything that is happening, and they're not ready to share. This picture seems to be different here in the Middle East, because we seem, in the region, I mean, I'm talking Middle East as in Asia and so on, to probably, because we're growing and expanding, we put a better value on people who have knowledge of finance and can give us a view how to look at numbers and how to grow the business. Because companies are looking here for CFOs we can trust to be our strategic partners. We can trust them, we can depend on them. Maybe part of it because most of our businesses are family businesses. We're not listed companies, although we are big companies, but we're not big corporations. And the most valuable executives are those who can provide vital insights into all aspects of the business instead of just company finances. So our CFO becomes our trusted confidant. They're the person who knows our finances, and he can tell us, yes, you can do this, or you can't do this, or you can afford to do so. So in my view, prospective CEOs who are in touch with the board, if there's a board, and had a significant face time with the outgoing CEO, not just sounding board, but really a sparring partner who will challenge the CEO and have had interaction with all aspects of the business, I think they would become a better CEO in the future because they add that issue that we talked about, that they are people who can quantify and map a process very clearly, more than a CEO that actually will go in most likely from a background of sales because they spend the whole thing and they sell it to the owners and to the board that I know what the market is. Knowing the market is very important, but knowing the business and quantifying it is also very important. Now, there are still certain terms that must be met. So while companies are increasingly opening the top leadership roles to candidates coming from the finance function, the jobs are invariably awarded to executives, as we said, who are well-versed in all aspects of the business. So if you look at what are the upsides of financial background, of course the upsides is you can assess risk, you can quantify things, you look at numbers, you're very good at reading a balance sheet, you can come up with a budget, you know, the usual. Let's assume 10% increase. I don't know how the hell you come up with 10%, but, you know, you're very good at that. And what are the downside? The downside is most CFOs are gatekeepers. They think in silos. They look in history. They don't want to project beyond a specific time. And their interpersonal skills need some probably working on too. The knowledge of the business is usually limited as an observer. So they need, in my view, they need to go out and understand the business more. I always say to my team, go on the shop floor, go and sit with the drivers when they deliver things, go and see what is happening on manufacturing, go and sit behind a guy who's selling something and understand how they react, go and sit behind the reception and see how the customers complain one way or a company. So company leaders today are expected not only to understand the business model, but also have a firm grasp of all the aspects of the business and how much each function works and interacts. I believe personally that CEOs and CFOs must be skilled in influencing cross-functional teams and in developing multifunctional skill sets among employees, and must also be able to build relationships outside the organization. CFOs, as a must, should think broadly and strategically about the business and develop their communication skills to interact well with internal and external stakeholders. And in my view, the difference between a CEO and a CFO is allocating of responsibilities, and in my view, the roles are interchangeable. It's just that one person cannot do both, and usually the difference between the two is a question of leadership. Now, in my view also, the new role of the CFO is not suited to the financial bystander who says, okay, I'm going to give you the numbers and maybe give you an opinion if they are good or bad. Rather, great CFOs are defined by their ability to take a holistic view of the company and all of its functions and say, here are some thoughts, here are my ideas, and here is what you need to do. Take some leadership on this. Having an ongoing and genuine interest in broader business issues is instrumental in reaching the top of the leadership ladder, and I don't differentiate between a CFO and a CEO. Financial experience has become an increasingly hot commodity for companies in the region looking to fill senior leadership positions. Doors, not so long ago, that were mostly closed to senior finance executives are opening throughout the region. But the route to the top is not an easy one, nor is leadership position suited to all CFOs. You know, CFOs who aspire to lead must be willing to move beyond the numbers and embrace every opportunity to expose themselves to the situations and challenges that will help them prepare to the top leadership position, irrespective of what the title is. So, are CFOs ready to drive the business? My answer is that you have no choice. Like, to go ahead and lead now. And when they tell you that it is not fun at the top, they're not telling you the truth. I enjoy every second of it. Thank you.
Mr. Makhzoomi, apologies. I hope you can stay for just a few more moments. Anyone with some questions for our keynote speaker? We can send a microphone round. But maybe I could possibly put a question to you. You mentioned the transition from perhaps being CFO at Arabtech to your new company. How transferable were and are your skills as CFO to CEO in a completely different industry?
Well, it's not really, because medicine is an engineering process, and if you map it, and it's a matter of numbers and ensuring that you provide a quality service to an insecure and concerned client. So you have to give them confidence that you know what you're doing and you have to deliver. Provided that you do deliver, they'll come back. And it's a growth industry. I mean, people are getting sick and people want to have children. So in that sense, it was easy as a business model. The difficult part is dealing with human expectations. I mean, some people get disappointed. So we want to make sure that the people handle our customers with care.
Anyone on the floor have a question? Just over the back there. If you can just stand and say your name, that'd be great.
Hi, my name is Murad Ali, from Abu Dhabi Shipbuilding, Finance Manager. My question is for the transformative CFOs. Do you recommend any other qualification, secondary qualification apart from the finance qualification? And to what degree? Like, is it just recommended or is it must?
I think the question there is beyond the CFO qualifications.
Exactly, for you to transform to the important role of like CEOs or a secondment to the CEO.
I think any knowledge is useful in anything you do. So the more workshops you attend, leadership, communication, understanding business, mapping, negotiations, anything is helpful, you know. But it's a matter of what you believe is a priority for you and what you think that you need. I mean, I don't believe in getting qualifications for the sake of getting qualifications. I wouldn't get a PhD in business because I think it's a joke, personally, you know. I had a meeting with a professor who was teaching entrepreneurship, and I said, have you ever worked in your life? And she said, no. So I said, this meeting is over. Yeah, because I can't see how you can teach entrepreneurship, never worked in your bloody life. So I think anything that has to do with communication is useful. Anything that has to do with planning is useful. Strategy work is useful. Numbers, of course, you're very good at numbers already. I mean, getting further qualifications and titles to your name, I believe, as a waste of time, but no disrespect to the institution. I was offered many titles, which I basically declined, because you know your skills. You know what you're lacking. And unless you go on the floor and really get involved in a business, like how do you manufacture a car or whatever it is, having the theory and studying it as a case study is useful.